Hello, my name is Brian Gallup, and welcome to the 1995 Northwoods Seminar. The Northwoods Seminar is hosted by my shop, the Guitar Hospital, which is located in Big Rapids, Michigan, and is also a chance for top builders and repair people from all over the world to get together, exchange new techniques and ideas, and instruct 30 participants on a variety of different topics. Now, the instructors show up tomorrow, which is Wednesday, and classes run Thursday through Saturday, so I thought I would take this opportunity to give you a quick tour of my shop. In this first room is the tool room. This is where we try to keep all the dirty work, our buffers and sanders. We've got a dust collection system on the back wall, runs into the back room. Here's the surfacing sanders for tops and sides and backs. We also have a sanding bench that sucks a lot of the dust out to help keep the dust down. It's also a building and repair school. We take 4 students at a time, so everybody gets their own bench with their own tools. And here we have the neck jig, so that we can get the fretboards flat for refrets. Let's move into the second room. This is the finishing room. This bench is where the 6-month student or apprentice does his work. He gets the most space. How you doing, Ken?
Hello.
Ken's working on a very early Gibson mandolin, doing a complete restoration on it. It's looking great, too. This is the spray booth. We put a picture glass window in it. For demonstration purposes, it works really well. This is the fret press with an arbor press mounted on top. This is storage. This is where we keep all the guitars, all the work in progress. Boy, I got to get to work. Moving down into the building room. Okay, this is the building room. Here's the go table. Gluing up tops and backs and parabolic dishes. There's a guitar someone's working on. And they're working on guitars. Notching for the back braces. Here's a couple other tops that are braced and scalloped, getting ready to go on. Over here we have the side bender and the acoustic box building bench. Here we're sanding in a parabolic curve. Pick that up for me a little bit, would you? He's sanding a parabolic curve in the sides of his guitar so his top will go on. Looks nice. Looking real nice. Here are the molds for different body sizes. Gluing in the dovetail block and the end block. Well, that's it. Let's go back into the other room. Okay, so that was a tour of my shop. I hope you liked it. I've got a lot of work to do for the instructors. They're coming in tomorrow, so I'll talk to you later. Thanks a lot.
Good morning. Today's Friday. I forgot what date it is. Must be the 6th.
October 6th.
October 6th. It's 1995. And we're going to talk about French polish. I'm hoping that I'll be able to do some instruction. I mean, it's kind of easy to do a demonstration. Say, watch, this is what I do, but I'm hoping I can impart some stuff that's more helpful than just watching. And to that end, I'd like to just distribute the materials around, because maybe some of you don't even know the materials that well. This is strictly shellac, and it's flake shellac. It's been refined rather highly, so it's clear, and it's the secretion of the famous lac bug. Indonesia, I believe. And those little critters land on branches and develop colonies and secrete this muck. And your friendly local indigenous population goes and chops off the dead branch with all the dead insects and the muck on it, and heats the muck over an open fire and drips it down into containers, and eventually reaches us having been more or less refined, and it comes in a lot of colors based on how much it's been refined. If it's not refined much at all, it's almost black-brown. It's so dark. So-called garnet shellac. And this is the most refined, and it's the blondest of all. It's virtually clear, like little chunks of handmade glass is what it looks like. And it's the ingredient for French polish, because we typically think of French polish as not a material, but a technique. It's simply a technique for getting the material onto surface. And it's a very old technique. Certainly predates finishing by spray materials. And it was actually used for years after spraying by companies like the Martin Guitar Company and some furniture companies because of the cost. The solvent cost in the early part of the century was really high. And so spraying didn't become a normal thing until the solvent cost was cheaper. So at any rate, stick shellac, or flake shellac, excuse me, also available in a sort of stick form. And these are just little blocks of the same stuff melted together. There's a dark amber. If you hold it up to the light, you can see that it's transparent but very dark. And the light stuff is probably it's probably very brittle and breaks like crazy. But it doesn't matter. And then it's also available with pigmented from the companies that make it for touch-up. And the pigmented stuff is opaque typically. And it's available in every color, pretty much. About 400 kinds of brown, all the primaries, and yellows and creams and ambers and all that.
Is that the same thing as burn-in sticks?
Yeah. Now that's the old-time burn-in stick, which is in fact shellac. And I believe these are actually just shellac. There's another kind of burn-in stick called lacquer stick, and it's a synthetic, and it melts. It's much more friendly, and it melts more easily. It doesn't tend to foam up when it's too hot when you're using it with a hot knife, and it's something I have less experience with, though. So I don't think I'll be using this, but it's just it's the same sort of thing. When you melt it, it smells like styrene. It smells like you're melting a cheap plastic box or something. So I don't really know what to... This is the lacquer stick.
Oh, lacquer stick.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, Woodcraft has currently got the Balin burn-in stick.
Mm-hmm.
You get 18 of them for like $19.
That's a good point. You know, John's got a point that it's stuff that's available in little kits. Most of the finishing companies that we deal with have some kind of stick shellac, and it's really... It's the stuff to fill a hole before you do French polish over it, because it's extremely compatible with shellac, since it is shellac. The only problem with the stuff that I found is it doesn't stick very well, and it, in a very long flat section, will flake and crack off because of that. It's also uncanny how brittle it is. It's so brittle that it will crack in deep sections also if it's touched very hard. So typically, I don't like to use it where there's adhesion problems or where the fill is giant. Don't do a lot of giant fills, and we can talk about that later on in the structural section. This little instrument is the willing guinea pig. Its finish is a mystery to me. I don't know what the material is on here. I don't much care if it's lacquer, varnish, or shellac, because the shellac will stick to it. My final material here. Shellac is dissolved in alcohol, and that's what this is. A thick solution of the shellac dissolved in alcohol. And it's common for people in the French polish business to add other materials to their French polish mixture. Some of the lighter gums, like copal and mastic, are traditionally used to increase the flexibility of the film that's on there so that it doesn't crack or scratch or powder the little... See how these powdery sort of trails come when you scratch the finish? All these little kind of powdery trails are more clear, of course, when the finish is very brittle and it crumbles as it scratches. they'll use gum mastic and other sorts of softeners in the finish. I don't typically do that. My French polish stuff that I do is typically on a musical instrument which we hope isn't being handled a lot, isn't being scratched a lot. I do like to add a little gum, though, that's the hardest gum in the world, and that's natural gum, that is. It comes from a variety of juniper, and I invite everybody to smell this because this is really old. This is a jar I bought about 20 years ago, but even now it still has a wonderful smell.
What is it like?
It's gum sandarac, and it's the hardest natural gum, and it's a gum that I like to throw in the shellac. I'll put maybe as much as 10% in there because it makes it smell really good, and other guys tell me it's true, and other guys tell me that it's a good thing to do. I don't happen to have any first-hand knowledge because I've tried using it with the sandarac and without, and I can't quite see the difference. But I'm going a little on tradition there.
And that's used for what in the French polish?
To make it a little tougher and to make it a little more elastic. And it's real common in this business to mech around with it. Well, that's an interesting question. If I really knew where it came from, I'd buy more and have it fresher.
Oh, yeah.
But
Woodworker Supply has it.
yeah,
Has it in there.
it's around.
They've got all that shellac.
Gum sand, what is it?
Sandarac.
Yeah,
S-A-N-D-A-R-A-C.
A
They've
lot
got
of
an
them.
excellent finishing section.
Yeah.
in there.
There's they also have the wood finishing catalog? Is that them?
Yeah.
Or wood finisher supply? Is that them?
Yeah, it's the same company.
It's just, oh, okay.
As near as,
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, everything that's in the finishing catalog is in the main woodworking.
Well, Larry's not exactly originally from San Francisco, but he certainly spent his time there. Maybe you've been to the same place. Nature's Herbs on Ellis Street.
See if I have a catalog
Are they still
in my
there?
car at the cottage. I'll bring you a copy.
I don't know. I've got a
Yeah.
woodworker supply, I just didn't know what this was.
Oh.
At any rate, this is a really swell smell, and as I say, I only use it at this point out of kind of silly habit and because I like the smell.
10%?
Maybe I'll put in as much as 10%. Yeah. Most of the time, though, really, I just use plain shellac dissolved in alcohol.
What kind of a cut, you know?
Well, no. I'm going to be like Tom yesterday about the cut of alcohol or shellac. I think it's probably around 1 pound is what I like, but I don't really
Can you show the
know.
proportions on the bottle, just how you
No,
mix it?
because I didn't mix this. I don't have any idea what this is. All I know is that it's pretty damn thick, as shellac goes. PDT shellac we have, pretty damn thick. And it's not too interesting to me what the pound cut is. What's really significant is how's it working right here. And that has more to do with the air temperature and how I'm handling it on the rag and what my intent is on the surface. If I want to build a lot, I'm going to use thicker shellac. If I want to polish and shine, I'm going to use the thinnest, down to and including using straight alcohol and nothing else. That's known as spiriting off, and it's the tricky part of French polish. French polish is tricky stuff. It's not particularly sophisticated, but it's something that, as far as I know, only comes from practice. So I set about deciding to learn to do French polish, and I'm looking for it's a rag? I guess these are rags, yeah. I set about deciding to learn to do French polish many years ago, after having attempted it and never really getting anywhere. And I've put together a kit, and I'd recommend everybody do this. I just put together a kit of all the little materials that I was using, and I used a fishing tackle box so that it would just be under the bench. And every single day for a year, I played with it. I did something on something, test board, an old instrument, whatever. And if you do a little of something like that every day, you learn it in a sort of an intuitive way that eventually keeps the mistakes down and allows you to come back to it after a year without having done it feeling fresh. So I think that whether it takes a year for everybody or they learn it in 2 weeks, I think the practice is the whole issue. And then later, seeing the results after a while is also important.
So what's the shelf life after you mix it up?
I don't know.
Is that
I've
way you
never...
can tell if your stuff's still good?
It drives me nuts because I hear about this and I've tried it, and the only stuff I know that's really no good is stuff I've got at home that is in the flake form that no longer will dissolve in alcohol. And sure enough, if it's bad, it'll be cloudy. But I don't know what the shelf life really is. I certainly have used it a year old with no troubles.
Test I have heard is to paint it on something, let it sit overnight, and try sanding it the next day. You know, a lot of sand to a white dust, but still.
Even my worst, cloudiest, horrible stuff will sand to a white dust. But when I try to do a French polish with it, it looks good, and the next day it turns milky. So I'm not so sure. It dries. I don't know if that's a test of the shellac or a test of the alcohol that it's dissolved in.
Mine's a bad dry.
Sticky forever.
I've never had that happen. I've never had the sticky problem. I've heard about it. Now, you can buy, I should touch on that, you can buy mixed shellac at any paint store. And as far as I know, it has no commercial use of any sort. I'm not sure what it's there for. To me, it's a totally worthless product. And it took me forever. Yeah. The mixed shellac you buy in the store is a peculiar stuff, and it has to do, if I understand correctly, it has to do with the way the stuff is graded, and they're allowed to put in something like 20% gasoline and other weird solvents in there to keep the cost down, and they sure do it. It's royal trash.
I think what it's for, if you got a stain on the wall, when you paint it, the stain shows through, shellac will seal it where...
Clearly it will, but this stuff works 10 times better, and it costs much less. So I'm just going to go back to saying I don't know any use that I would put that stuff to. I just, once I discovered flake shellac, I just put the other stuff completely out of my mind. It has no use in my life at all. And believe me, I used all the leftover shellac I have. I use on bookshelves, or what was he saying, painting out stains and woodwork and that kind of stuff. It's really helpful to have just junk lacquer and junk shellac around. So save your old materials, don't throw them away. You know, use them up. The last item of hardware and software here, as it were, this is sort of soft, is my little pad. Now, Tom's building whole finishes on new instruments, and he may be doing maybe 6 or 7 instruments, so he's got a really big pad. I'm doing touch-up work and maybe one surface. And I like a small, easily handled pad, and I definitely agree with Tom about the whole business of how you hold it and how it wants to wobble around in your hand. And you use those big wads that they show in the textbook, and I still can't figure out what they're for either. I just use a regular sheet, regular cotton sheet. I like to use the same one. So I have a little tub like this at home, and inside it is my wet shellac rag. If I haven't done any shellac work in a really, really long time, it dries up and I'll re-soften it with some alcohol. But I just use the same rag literally until I wear through it. It starts to look black almost with dirt and stuff. Just plain cotton sheet. Yeah, 100% cotton. The finest I've got around is good. One friend of mine who is a really expert French polisher would take his little pad like this, and for the very final coats, he'd wrap it in a piece of pantyhose to have a very smooth but porous surface. The pad inside is nothing more than another folded piece of the sheet. My piece, just for reference standpoint, is so big. And really the size of the job dictates what size piece you want. It's a little stinky because I've just poured a little alcohol on it to kind of start the process here. And there's a little bit of shellac in the alcohol on this pad. I like to fold it into a nice little tight package. It holds quite a lot of liquid that way. And I just wrap it up. I like to have, some guys tie it. I like to have access to the pad inside, so I just wrap it and hold it. Okay. I think I'm going to start by talking about just finished touch-up in particular. And I'd like to use this little guinea pig here. I've got my little stick shellac iron, which is a soldering iron with a little specialized tip on it. And this is available from the same guys that sell the stick shellac. And there are various styles. It doesn't seem necessary to have one of these until you have one. Once you buy one of these things, you say, oh yeah, that's why we don't use the alcohol lamp and the little spatula. These things are great. The alcohol lamp and the little spatula to heat it up is sure to get cold before you get to the before you get to the spot in question compared to these guys. So I'm gonna fill a deep wound in the back of this thing here real quick for you and show you how I do it anyway. So we've got a nasty hole here. It's a pretty deep one. Now I'm not going to worry too much about color like this, and I'm certainly never going to have time or the budget to worry like Tom does about Marcel, that is, about the color of the perfection of touch-up work. To kind of soften the crumbly aspect of it all here, I'm just going to touch it with a little bit of shellac and let that dry, and it turns that spot dark, which it's always preferable to have a dark spot in a light surface over a light spot in a dark surface. That really, it's amazing how much your eye picks up a slight light spot underneath and how much you'll forgive a dark spot. I'm going to take my burn-in knife, is what they call it usually, and all I'm going to do is heat this. And you may want to get close to see this, because as the stick shellac heats, you can see it sort of boils. And it's really not very sticky, except to itself. I'm going to put some in there, in a little hole here. And one of the problems I've had, and it's a really big deal for me, is if you look at that, it's got little bubbles in it. And they're going to show up as little highlights. I don't know if you can see those at all. But it's got little bubbles inside. They're going to show up as terrible little highlights when the thing is sanded over and finished over. And so what I like to do is make sure it's really hot and bubbly, as it's going to be, so it's liquid through its whole state, and then I just iron it down with my thumb really hard. And it seems like I'm able to squish out the bubbles that way. I do a lot of that sort of crude stuff. Just if I get a pinhole when I'm lacquering, spraying lacquer, if I was spraying like Yas is there, probably not doing color, if I were doing clear, and I got a pinhole, I just squish it with my thumb. It makes a hell of a mess, but it's a shallower mess than the pinhole is. So on the next sanding out, I can go through that. So I've got one little spot filled here, and it's nice and solid, and it looks dark, and I like that look. I'm going to unplug my iron here.
Frank, one of the problems I've had when I've used this stuff is I always seem to end up with a depression. Do you try to pack it in so that you've got a definite hump there going forward?
Absolutely. Now my hump on this is quite high. Let me pass it around because it's the easiest thing to see up close. It's a real tall lump. At least I hope it's tall. And the stuff is really interesting to me because it's in its final form, like this. It doesn't shrink or change shape the way a deep fill of lacquer would.
What's the biggest area you could patch with that stuff without fear of it cracking?
I don't know. 3/16 diameter, something like that. Maybe a quarter inch without any problem. I don't know how big I'd want to go. I think, generally speaking, if it's a really huge hole that's much bigger than that, we'd talk about some kind of an inlay that would make it look a little better. So the lump on there then is the issue. And I'd like to talk about another fill material that we're all using these days. Some of us admit it and some of us don't, and that's the super glue. I have some super glue right here. And to fill that hole with super glue would be, oops, I just dropped some. To fill the hole with super glue would be just a matter of dropping a piece on like that, like I just did. And the reality is that it makes a really good fill. It's very clear. It's very solid. It does change shape a little bit under lacquer because the lacquer solvents will attack it, but it works wonderfly under French polish. It will fill a very large area without cracking. It adheres to anything very nicely. And I'm going to put a little lump on here just for general interest. I got a little spot right there. I'm going to put the accelerator on, which is an absolute no-no when doing finish work with cyanoacrylate. only doing that for demonstration purposes, the classic don't do this at home kind of thing. And I've got a little ding here, and I'm going to put a drop right in that ding. What happens under the super glue when it's got the accelerator on it is a mystery to me, but it's prone to developing little white flecks, or actually heating up to the point where it boils and making a real mess. The little white flecks can appear under the finish in a super glue fill. They can appear days later. So you think you've got it nailed, and you look back the next day and it looks like hell. So I really caution against using that accelerator. But I have had tremendous luck with both epoxy and super glue for clear fills that have to be low and flat.
You're using the super glue that's got the gap filling.
This is the gap filling stuff. I don't have any prejudice. I'll use any of the super glue depending on the situation. We were just talking the other day about Jean Larrivée, who makes all those fine guitars up in Canada, and he uses super glue as an undercoat before the lacquer finish. He says, I think he said he uses $7 worth of super glue on every guitar. And that's buying it in the industrial.
Brush it out.
I think he sprays it.
He sprays it.
I think
Sprays
so.
it as what?
As an undercoat, as a sealer for the lacquer. I've done it. It works like nothing else. If you have a lacquer that you want to stick to an impossible finish, super glue will work. However, the compatibility between the super glue and the lacquer is important, and I don't know which is which at this point, as I haven't done enough experimentation. Michael Dresner, who knows everything about finishes, tells me that there are ethyl and methyl cyanoacrylates, and knowing which you have is going to be the key, and there's no way to know whether, say, the thick and the thin are one or the other. At any rate, I've got two fills now. I'm just going to level those real quickly. And I have a technique for doing that, which I need my tape for. Uh-oh. No, this is it. There's a little tape. There's a little tape dispenser on my bench back there. It's just a Scotch tape, yeah. Masking tape will work.
Frank, I found that like when you're spraying lacquer on a lot of inlay on a pig head or something, you always get a lot of nooks and crannies that don't want to fill up with lacquer, and the stick shellac works good for that.
It works good for that. Super glue works good for that, too. Shellac has a property that we all love the most, and that is it is the friendliest, stickiest material we work with for finishes. It sticks to any finish rather well without chemically bonding with it. And
Lacquer does?
Shellac.
Shellac.
And it makes an undercoat on any finish.
Under lacquer too.
Under lacquer, it makes the best sealer coat in the business, as far as I can tell. I don't know what the vinyl sealer is all about that these guys use.
Shellac gives the wood a nicer tone.
Shellac gives a wonderful, wonderful tone, absolutely. I'm going to take my scraper and I'm going to just burnish the edge real scraper, I keep calling it that, razor blade, and I'm going to burnish the edge real quickly. And so I just curled that very fine edge over a little bit, and then I protect the ends with pieces of tape. I've got pieces of tape covering about 1/4 inch of each end, maybe 3/8. And I'm just going to scrape my finish fills down to the surrounding level. Using that little tape trick has saved me so many finishes. I can't explain it. Just amazing. Because as I scrape, I'm cutting only the lump. I'm not scraping the wood around it. I'm not scratching the finish at all.
This is what you do to clean the lacquer under a bridge before you glue it too?
No. I scrape it off, but I use a different sort of scraper. For this operation, if you look at it, just as I'll pass it around real quickly. This one right here, you can see I've cut down almost to the level of the surrounding finish without even touching the finish around it. That would be critical where the finish had color in it and was very thin, because we're taught very simply to put a fill in that's a tall lump and then sand off the lump and then polish everything there. And that makes sense as long as you don't scuff through the surrounding finish, which on old instruments you always do.
You do that little burnish trick with the blade. You want to get the curl so it's scraped, so the curl's like this when you're scraping?
Yeah. Let me draw this here. I didn't realize I had one of these. I don't have a pen around though. Yes. So the razor blade has a very steep cutting angle, and I'm just burnishing the little top of it over to a little bit, just a little bit of a curve, so that it cuts one direction very easily, and you can feel that on my little scraper. I'll just pass that around too. I ought to pass everything around so people can see it. It's the cheapest scraper, never needs sharpening, and you throw it away. So you can just burnish the edge, put the tape on, and the minute it seems like it's not cutting, you chuck it and start over. And you don't waste a lot of time. Razor blades are very cheap, particularly if you buy them by the thousand. And I certainly burn through a lot of razor blades this way, but it saves me so much time that the cost is insignificant. So I'm going to scrape both of these down a little bit. Now, I can afford to be pretty crude with this old-timer because it's here just for demo. It's also a kind of an old Hulk that may or may not ever get resurrected, but it's a good, willing donor. So now I've scraped to the point where I'm just touching the surface now with my scraper, because as I lean on the razor blade, it bends just a little bit, and it'll actually cut below the level of the tape. Now, if this were going to get a lacquer finish over it, I would probably scrape the fills down, or if it were a lacquer finish that I was touching up in just an area, I would definitely scrape the fills below the surface by curving the razor blade just a little bit and going just a couple thousandths of an inch below the surrounding area, so I have a little well. Then I'd fill that little well up with brushing on a little lacquer, or maybe spraying on a little in a touch-up spot. Then I'd polish it all out. This is a French polish job, and so I'm going to simply sand and scuff the whole area, because I want the French polish to do two things. I want it to bite in and stick well, and I want it to try to amalgamate some of this mess, because it's really messy. My favorite sanding block for leveling lumps is a very hard block. It cuts only the high spots. And I'm just going to sand off those lumps. You can see the lumps now highlighted.
What grade of paper is that?
This is 220, and I'm using 220 because that's what I had on my bench back there, and it's because it's a decent enough grit to grind in, and it leaves a fairly smooth surface. Since we're working in a hurry today, I'm using 220. I might actually use coarser sandpaper and count on putting more shellac on if I were trying to fill this all level, because you can see how deep these scratches are. By comparison, I could use 60 grit sandpaper and not injure the finish any worse than these scratches already are. But with my 60 grit paper, I could cut through accidentally and have light scars going through there. So I'm going to use a slower sanding technique than that. The thing about French polish is that we tend to have some basic assumptions about it as a mystery and a sort of a medium. It's actually tricky to learn how to do it, but once you learn how, it's not particularly tricky stuff to work with, or all these factories wouldn't have used it routinely. It wouldn't have been the mode of finishing for furniture if it was impossible to do. It would have to be done easily and quickly by thousands of people in the country, and people just working regular factory jobs would French polish all day. So it has to be something that you can also accomplish in a day, or I should say that you can do all day without dropping dead from the effort of the physical or mental strain. Okay, so I've scuffed the surface now, and I have a wonderful batch of scratches that I'm hoping are mostly through the finish. That is, through to the surface of finish, and are not patterns of poor adhesion of the finish, caused by denting the wood and having the finish bounce back. Now this is such an old finish, I think I can count on that being the case. So the first thing I want to do with this guy is I want to amalgamate the surface as much as I can. And I'm going to take my rag here, and I'm going to start my amalgamation process with just a little bit of alcohol. And actually rather a lot compared to some sorts of French polish. So I've got just enough so it just wants to drip, but it hasn't quite dripped yet. I'm just going to take my rag right out of its little holder. I'm just going to wipe it down to see what it looks like. And I can see I'm getting a pretty good tendency to amalgamate throughout the surface here. Overall, it's obviously improved the look tremendously just to have that much done. So I know I'm on the right track. I've got some deep holes here that I'm just going to try to get some more alcohol down into to just give it a little bite. This will tend to soften the surface just a little bit. If it's shellac on the surface or if it's lacquer, a quick wipe of alcohol will give the surface a little bit of a solvent action, and it will bite into it just a little bit. If it's varnish, it'll tear the stuff right off. So you have to be very careful. So as I felt it, I could feel that it wasn't ripping right through the finish, so I know it's not a varnish finish. Could be shellac, which is mildly soluble when it's dry, or lacquer, which can also be mildly soluble. I'm going to mix some shellac in my little dispensing bottle. I've been using that bottle now for a lot of years, and it's gotten to be kind of an old friend. Kind of like the way the shellac's crusting up over all the top of it. So I've got now some shellac going in here with a little extra alcohol. I'm going to try to build up a little finish.
Is that about 50-50 mix?
Well, it is, but I don't know it's 50-50 from what. So I'm kind of...
What you were mixing in there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is that Brian made for me. It's fairly saturated, so it's as shellac gets. I'm going to step back here in case I drip. As shellac gets, it could be a little thick. And I'm going to pour some right onto my rag here. Yeah, it's pretty good thickness for French polish. I'm going to put a little on my rag real quickly. And you can see I've got a lot on there. It's dripping right off. I'm going to go back over. Now, ordinarily, I would use a great big, fat, fuzzy camel's hair brush, and I would just go brush it right across. Didn't want to bring my brush because I was afraid I wouldn't get it cleaned out. So I'm just going to use this rag, and I'm mopping on a very sloppy, wet streaks across the whole thing. I'm most concerned about the shellac sticking nicely to the finish, so I want that first bit to be really wet when it hits. Unlike a new finish, sticking to the old finish is very important. Overcoating the second coat, very important to get that to stick well. And to get it to bite in, I always use a very wet first wipe, or two actually. In fact, I think this is probably deserving of a second wipe. As you're doing the French polish, and as you wipe, you can see the can you see the wet trails I'm making as I do this? Is that possible to see? That's wet and it's sticky. It comes right off of my fingers, you know. It's just absolutely a sticky, gooey mess. Okay, I'm going to close that back. I'm going to let this sit for a second. I'm going to do a little quick drawing. I've never tried to draw this before exactly, but this is the surface that I'm French polishing. This is the back of the Mando. And I'm going to be taking my little pad. I'm going to be moving it in this direction, and behind it is going to be that wet slime trail. And if I look at this trail behind, as it's drying, I can see, as I'm going, I can see the drying sort of comet trail that I'm making.
Yeah, slip right behind just for a second.
And that little trail is how I'm going to judge. I'm going to be looking in reflected light from there to my eye. I mean, looking in reflected light only, and I'm going to be watching that little trail behind my pad, because the one thing that separates being able to do French polish and not being able to, I think there's only one real thing, and that is knowing whether the finish is going from here onto the surface, or if you're in fact picking it up from the surface and dragging it back onto the rag. And that really makes a difference. And once you get that sense of which you're doing, you'll have it. It's really quite an amazing little piece of information to generate for yourself. I'm just folding it up so I can fold it over my finger. I happen to like to hold it this way. It gives me good control. Some people hold it this way, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I've got my covered pad. I'll feel it on my hand, and as I pounce it on my hand, I can see it makes a big old spot. In fact, it made my hand so sticky that when I hold the instrument, I'm going to put fingerprints on it. So I dry my hand to make sure I'm really dry, and then give it that wipe again. Very wet. You can see that I'm just still completely wet over the whole surface. It's wet and sticky, and as I rub it, I can feel it dragging. It's just dragging like crazy now, and it's wanting to pick the finish off the surface and deposit it back on its little pad. This is a point where oil starts to become interesting to me, because I've deposited about as much muck on here as I can without getting stuck in it. So I'm going to put a little drop of oil on my finger, and I'm going to put just a little on the surface. You can put it on the pad if you want. You put it on the surface. I do both. I've just got some smears. You can see them just around there. And I'm going to skate around on those smears back and forth to just kind of distribute what's there.
What kind of oil are you using?
I'm using lemon oil here. It seems not to matter what oil you use, although I like the thinnest oil possible, because it seems like if I use linseed or some of the other heavy oils, the pad drags, and I like the smoother feel of the lemon. So at this point, I'm able to wipe stuff across here, and I'm skating across on the surface. I've got just a little bit. Anybody want to feel this? You can see that there's just a little bit of moisture there. It's not real wet. I'm not depositing much. See, it's just enough to make your hands cold. Yet I've got a trail, and if you look as I go, I make a little trail, and it does dry behind the rag a little bit. I'm still depositing on the surface because I've got that oil floating me across. And I've got a shine on here now, and you can see the shine, but all of the scratches are still completely visible. I haven't filled anything. I've just shined the whole area. So what I want to do is get on lots more shellac, because I want to get my shellac down in the holes. And I'm going to start adding a ton more shellac here to my rag. And I'm going to try to squish this stuff down into the holes. I'm just flooding it on here. And so I've got a really sloppy mess at this point. Just starting to drip. Dry it off just a little bit, because that's really sloppy. And then I'm just going to wipe across. Still working with as little oil as I can possibly use. I've only got a drop so far, but I've got a pretty sticky mess here. And I'm going to use even more shellac, and I'm just going to keep building it until I've built up a layer of shellac that's thick and pliable enough that I can actually get down into those little holes. There you can see how wet that is. It's sloppy. I'm hitting it fast and coming off it, because if I drag very far, I'll go over the recently hit areas and I'll pull it back off the surface, because as I look at it, I can see my splotches aren't even drying yet, because I've got so much wet shellac on there. I want to really build it up so it's very thick. Now, some of these holes are way too deep to fill, but a lot of them won't be too deep. The spots that I filled earlier are already completely smooth. You can't even see them in the reflected light anymore. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little drop of oil on the rag and start wiping across. This is drying very slowly. I like to work in front of a little heater that blows a little hot air across it so it dries even faster, because I am always in a hurry. Just wiping it on. You look at it, I don't know if anybody can see it in reflected light here. It's really worth seeing, because you can see the streaks and the wetness of it. Oh, I could do that, huh? Like this, huh? Okay, maybe I'll do that. Maybe people can see it better too, I don't know. Sure.
An oil like this on lacquer or anything else would destroy your finish. Why is it that this stuff works with shellac?
I'm unclear as to what you mean by destroy the finish.
Well, I mean, you know what oil or silicone, anything like that can do to a finish, like a lacquer finish. You get.
I've heard
fish
that.
eye.
I've heard that this oil is bad for lacquer finishes, but I've many times used oil as a lubricant to sand, wiped it off, and then lacquered over it, and not had any trouble
With this stuff.
with lemon oil. Silicone I'll buy. Everybody has a fear of silicone. And there is such a thing as a paintable silicone, but it's a really rather rare thing. I don't really know. Certainly the chemistry is completely different here. The basic assumption we're making is that the oil acts as a lubricant and it doesn't get incorporated in the finish. That assumption is not entirely correct because you can bloody well smell the lemon oil when you sand through a finish that's got lemon oil as the lubricant. So it's in there somewhere. How much is trapped and under what circumstance, I don't really know. So I'm just adding more shellac on here.
You never add the shellac to the bottom of the pad. You always pour it in.
Well, if I'm using if I want a lot, I pour it inside. If I want just a little, I'll put it on the outside. But if I just, you can see I've got a puddle standing on it there, and it's just soaking right through. So I have a ton of it there. This is actually a little thinner than I thought I'd be starting with, so it seems to go a little slower. I've got a sticky layer on there that's, I would think, approximately the same thickness and certainly the same stickiness if you had just sprayed a coat of lacquer on a surface. It's really sticky. You can see my fingerprints. They just go way deep into it. One wipe with a wet rag, though, and I can take the fingerprints out. If you look here, I hit it a couple of times, and one of my strokes tore some of the finish loose. You can see there where the stroke went across here. You can see the roughness in that particular area. It starts to crumble the finish or make it roll a little bit because I've got so much on there and so little oil. I'm going to put a little more oil on. About half that much. I'm always just grabbing and wiping to get rid of the excess oil or whatever because it's a matter of convenience. I'm always kind of covered with this stuff when I'm finished. Now I hit it with the rag too hard in that area again, and you can see that area where it's really, really thick and soft. And I'm spreading around a film that's really messy in that area. And it's drying rather slowly. I'm going to go back to my little lamp here. Touching this as lightly as I possibly can as I go across it. I can feel it drag a little bit because it's so soft, and I can feel the surface just as I touch down and let go. My wipe is very fast because I just don't have time. It's so sticky. It's just like glue. It's so sticky that I can't park the rag for even as much as to slow down. I have to keep rolling. And I'm going to add a little more oil yet. What I'm doing is kind of pushing the finish around now on the surface. Because my surface is so messy. As I get a little more oil on there, I can press harder. As I press harder, I can mush the finish down into the cracks. And that's exactly what's happening here. And I'm still unclear as to what anybody can see, but if you can watch my rag go across, you can see that trail, vapor trail behind it. Real long trail. But it's drying right behind the rag. If I start in circles, by the time I get around, it's dry. So pretty soon I can start going in circles. Here I am, going around in a circle, and you can see the little trail drying behind me. Can you see that? So I'm just going to go around and around. At each pass, I'm depositing a tiny little bit extra. It's flashing dry as I go. And I can do any pattern I want to on here. It seems like it goes over the areas that need it and that can take it. As I go around, I'll feel different roughness, as it were, where it's thicker or stickier, or where it's thinner and harder. And I'm just adding more and more as I go, across and across. And I'm pushing harder. As it gets drier, I'm pushing harder. As I push harder, that trail behind my rag increases in length. But because it's so dry, it was a very short trail, so I'm keeping that trail about 4 or 5 inches long as I go by pushing harder. And you can hear just from the sound of it how hard I'm hitting it. I can go faster as it gets drier with my rag, and I can push harder. And I can actually generate a lot of heat on here. The little, where I stopped there was where the rag stuck and it rolled on me. Now if I were trying to produce a final shine all at one time, this would be a perfect place to do it, because I can just keep going harder and harder and harder until it's almost dry under my hand. And I can actually feel a temperature increase on the surface. And at this point, I think I've got a nice build on the surface. And if you look at it in reflected light, about 2/3 of the scratches are actually filled up all the way to the top. Some of them are still showing. Some of these really deep ones are way too deep for a French polish fill, really. But it gives us a real good look. It looks tremendously better, of course, than it did before. And I have a choice at this point. I can either stop, or I can say, you know, well, I really want to just try to fill up as much of this as I can. Maybe I'll go another wet layer. And it's, as I say, it's really thick and sticky, but I can just keep building, just as though I were spraying it. It can keep building and building and building, and I will eventually get a film that's very thick. And just like a thick sprayed finish, it's going to take a long time to dry. It could take 3 or 4 days to get to the point of being worthy of sanding out. I've got another layer of shellac going here, and my trail is longer. It feels very slick because I'm adding more slimy finish to the surface. And at this point, I'm going to call this one basically done after this application, I think, because I think it serves the illustration reasonably well.
Some of those little nips that are too big for a shellac fill, can you take some shellac in liquid form and drop it in there like you do drop fill on lacquer and let it dry?
You can, but it's tricky.
It is.
You know how lacquer wants to crawl out of a hole? It wants to climb up by capillary action. Shellac does that much worse, unless it's extremely thick. When it's extremely thick, then it takes a long time to dry. But otherwise, you bet. You can see proof positive that a thick film of shellac is possible, because there it is. It's very thick, it's very hard, and it's actually in good shape. And you could fill this, potentially you could fill this all with French polish if you wanted just to get thicker and sloppier and thicker and thicker. My problem here is that if I do, then I'll have something that has to be put aside for so long that for purposes of our demonstrations here, we won't be able to go any farther with it.
Can you come back after a preliminary run like this and look at the ones that are still really deep that would be a pain and say, well, now I'll go back and fill those with super
Absolutely.
glue or with shellac?
Absolutely. I may just do that tomorrow. Now that I've got a preliminary job here, I've added finish. It's just like lacquer now. My new finish is clear. It's something I know about because I put it on. It's very easily handled, and it would even be reasonable to French polish to this level before doing any finishing touch-up, because you might be so worried about scuffing through the old finish and the old color that you want to put clear on first, then fill, scrape down, sand lightly, and then put another clear coat of shellac over the whole thing.
Is the oil you put on there going to be a problem if you wanted to fill at this point?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. There's very little oil, really. I think I used about 6 drops on the job so far. And if you look at the surface, it isn't oily. It doesn't have any kind of oil trail as I rub my hands over it. And that brings up another point. If you'd like, I could do just a kind of a shine job on this guitar over here. I don't know how much time we have for all of this today. Don, do you have any sense of that?
Time?
Yeah. Since this is sort of an impromptu thing, I'm not sure.
I think we got to 11.
Oh, well, if we have till 11, I'll do another subject here. Yeah. Go ahead and handle it if you'd like. The back is really sensitive, but if you're curious about its condition, go ahead and dig a piece out with your fingernail, or try to put a fingerprint in it, because you'll see how soft it really is. It's actually rather thick and rather soft.
Frank, one of the problems with a French polish finish is its fragility. It'll spot with water or alcohol, it wears through. When you come back over a French polish and put on a light coat of thin varnish or something like Qualisol, it's got kind of a lacquer characteristic, and give it a little bit more durability, particularly for moisture and alcohol protection.
Yeah, he's asking if we can overcoat French polish for protection, and I have a feeling it's not a good idea for 2 reasons. The one thing about French polish that we like so much is that it's very repairable with the French polish technique. It's easy to put more French polish back on and touch up a scratch, because you can flow the finish around. The other is that shellac, when it's thick under finishes, is not too friendly with some finishes, particularly lacquer. If you use this stick shellac under lacquer, it has an odd property of staying soft forever. By forever, I mean years. And that's really an unfortunate kind of situation. The lacquer sticks don't do that. But I suspect that shellac under finish has to be kept to a minimum thickness. I don't know what that thickness is. I have another guitar here that's suffering from terminal dullness. And Brian said it'd be okay if I just would a French polish over it.
Sanded that out.
I haven't done anything to it. This is just the way it was in this back room here. It's an old Maybell, so it's a cheapo.
Little finger marks on the sides, I see, or is that?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, this is a real dirt cheap guitar. It's a Slingerland's entry in the guitar field in the 20s. You know, it's got the celluloid fingerboard and cheapo everything. The bottom of the barrel tuners. All birch. I'm going to just give it a quick little kind of scuffing over. I don't want to go through the color, really. The finish is almost non-existent on this thing, I think. And one of the advantages with the French polish stuff is it will kind of overcoat almost anything reasonably well. So I'm not too afraid that I'll run into silicones or any of those things that'll cause me difficulties. So I'm going to do the same thing here. It'll be a little bigger surface. I'll still use the same pad.
You'd brush on this first.
I would ordinarily brush on a coat. Sometimes if it's really just crunched up, super pitted, and in effect a total mess, the way that Mando was, I might brush on about 6 coats. No, I think I would just brush them this way, and drying between.
Just real thin wash coats?
Yeah, not too thin, kind of sloppy thick. And it would look like hell. It would have ridges and yuck all over it. I'd sand after the final one, but I wouldn't typically sand between coats. So I'm just painting this stuff on, and it's going on pretty wet. You can see I'm taking color and everything else off with it on my little rag here.
Is it okay to spray it if you have it in a spray gun? I mean,
It's okay to spray it. I have a real problem with shellac in spray guns because it's bloody messy to clean out. Shellac is pretty unfriendly stuff in spray guns, I think.
Tom yesterday said he sprays his first coats.
Yeah, he does. I just don't like it. But Tom's also not using a lot of lacquer, I don't suppose, and so he wouldn't necessarily have to clean his gun up for lacquer for the same day or something.
I don't think he puts lacquer in his gun at all.
Yeah. The best French polisher I knew when I was starting to learn this stuff liked to use sanding sealer as a base coat. Actually, he was into a lot of weird things too, but his technique for finishing, and he made classical guitars, his technique for finishing was to whip up some egg whites into a kind of a meringue foam and smear it all over, and then let that all dry, sand it, so he sized it with egg albumin that way, and then a coat of sanding sealer over the top of that. But with those two layers, he had an impenetrable surface for the shellac. There's no chance of it sinking in, and so he kept saying things like, "Why polish the polish? Let's just get to put the stuff on and get out of here." You know, I'm more interested in kind of the tradition of it all because what I do is work on old instruments, and they presumably had brushed varnish. The old Gibsons, for instance, must have been brushed varnish because you can see brush marks. It must have been brushed varnish with a French polish shellac kind of shine.
Randy
As the rub out.
might have been trying to make French toast instead of French polish.
I should have. Oh, gee, it's 20 years too late to go get him with that one. That's really good. So I've got my thick stuff again. My aim here is not going to be to build a very big finish. So I'm going to give it one kind of wipe down with the thick stuff. You can see I've got these trails and streaks everywhere.
What do you think of the male like? Is it fall saw or the mohawk?
I've never used any of those things.
You just use straight shellac?
Always straight shellac. I have an inherent distrust of the prepared things because I've heard a lot of bad things about them. And I've also wanted to try to learn the way I thought things must have been done in the factories. Because I think it's really important to keep an eye on the fact that what we're talking about with the old instruments is industrial process that was expedient and successful repetitively, and presumably with people who weren't any brighter than me doing the work. For instance, the rubbed stains that you see in the old Gibsons. I've seen guys spend a day to get a sunburst right on the face of a guitar, and I'm thinking the problem with all of that is that by the time the stain has been worked around so much, it has a different look. It has a different kind of color feel to it because of the way the solvents act. And it seems to me that you'd have a better and more consistently authentic result if you were able to do it in the same length of time that the original guys did too. I'm going to dilute my shellac on my pad here because I think I've got too much shellac and not enough kind of alcohol for this particular job.
The thing I've always sensed about, I know a lot of people that work at the Gibson factory, and I keep asking them questions, about specific things, and it's always I get these same general answers, and it's like, well, we just slapped a little of this on there and buffed this and did that, and there was no science, rhyme, or reason to anything. It was all, there was no, it just didn't seem like whatever worked.
It's a bunch of guys doing a job, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just, it wasn't rocket science.
Well, that's what everybody, what drives me nuts is when people come to our shop and they'll look at an old instrument and they'll say, what were they thinking when they made that? That's the wrong question. They weren't thinking. They were just getting a day's work done, going home and raising kids, like anybody else. I'm doing the same thing here. You can maybe see the trail a little better. I'm just sort of flowing the stuff around. Got a lot of dings and scratches in this guy too that are highlighted. So this also brings up a point about French polish, and that is that it certainly pays to go over the smoothest, cleanest possible substrate. A perfect surface saves all the trouble in the world. Like Tom was talking yesterday about getting it filled correctly. You could fill with French polish, but it takes so long that it probably wouldn't make any sense in most cases. Just going over and over, same sort of thing. And
Would you do new work the same way? I mean, after you fill it?
yeah, yeah. I like to mop the stuff on as a base. You know, shellac is an interesting material because if you're used to using lacquer, you're used to using an interesting material too, but it's completely different. Shellac, unlike lacquer, is really not very soluble in its solvent, so that even the most soluble shellac, the freshest brand new shellac, takes overnight to dissolve the crystals in a jar. If you did that with lacquer, it would be done instantly. It would be seconds and it would be all dissolved. So I think that we can take advantage of that property with shellac in successive coats, because you know then that the first coat isn't going to be softened by the fourth coat of shellac. It's not even going to be touched at all. And that means to me that shellac makes a great undercoat for shellac. Put another drop or two. And I'm only putting the oil on to keep the sticking of the rag down. I don't mind the streaks I get from the dragging the rag across, but I don't want to tear up the previous passes, and that's why the oil lubricant. I was taught to use the very least amount of oil possible, and people say that that's a good idea. But in experimenting with it, I've tried using a ton of oil, and I have not really seen any problems or very different finish as a result.
Tom loaded the oil on. Every time he added alcohol or shellac, he added oil to the pad. I mean, you could have poured this finish off into your crank.
Right, and I was taught that that's bad to do, but I've tried it, and it seems to work fine. So, I don't know what to say about that. It just seems perfectly reasonable to me.
When you get done with this, do you wait a few days and then do you buff it, or you just leave it alone?
That's what I'd like to try to do with this, is to, I'd like to try it. I won't be able to do it exactly because this is a big, thick coat, but I'd like to do the job. Maybe I'll do it on the mandolin because it's smaller. I'd like to do the job of the final buffing that is traditionally done.
I guess what I'm asking, do you normally light sand and buff shellac, or do you?
I will light sand it to relieve the same problems that lacquer gets. Lacquer gets uneven, gets pinholes, it sinks in some spots, and it may be tall in other spots where it may be sagged or ran. In that case, it'll be streaks. I might sand those lightly, but I don't think that it's appropriate to buff shellac French polish for me, because I'm working with instruments that weren't done that way. They were polished in, I assume, the traditional spiriting off technique that is also another one of those mysteries in this business. And it brings up, I think, another one of the interesting properties of working with a finish where you're actually handling it while it's wet. Yeah, because as I'm handling it while it's wet, it won't crawl out of pores, it'll go in because I'm pushing it, physically jamming it in. And as I hit it, if I hit it hard, you can imagine that I'm pushing in it pretty hard. At this point, I've just added some material over the whole guitar, and I maybe use this as a subject for tomorrow if I do some more of this stuff, or for later today or whatever. But again, I'm using, as you can see, as little oil as I can, just because that was the way I like. And also, it helps, I think it helps the drying not to have oil on the surface. So if I had a lot of oil on the surface, and I might just wipe it off. But I usually don't have any noticeable amount. Here you can see that it's got that same kind of streaky mess of a shine that looks a lot better than the sides. But it's got a long ways to go to look like a perfect guitar. I want to see how this guy's doing over here. Oh yeah, he's starting to dry up a little bit.
Hey Frank, can we take a break here while Yas does the sunburst like we talked about?
We can do it.
He's
This is
ready.
El
Want
Perfecto.
to announce it in both rooms?
You know, I've got a couple old antique tables that have got, they've got these classic scratches and dents.
Yeah,
I think
well,
I'll practice on
I
it.
did.
Yeah. That's
Works
a good-
great on old tables.
Yeah. Really, it's just the tops that need to be redone.
Mm-hmm.
It's a perfect opportunity to do something with this.
But it's amazing the difference for me after practicing a lot. It's
Yeah.
a little
Yeah, I
bit
think
every
that's-
day.
I think that's the key.
It's
That's
clearly
real.
Tom Marcel said it yesterday, and I think it's one of the best quotes I've heard at the event today, to date. And that is, any number of people would spend hours every single day trying to practice and learn Foggy Mountain Breakdown on the banjo. So
Yeah.
it's no wonder they don't get good at it if they don't practice their colors every day. And that's why he's good at it, because he's putting in the time, practicing all the time.
And there's no money in Foggy Mountain Breakdown. I can attest.
There's no money in French polish. There's no money in French polish until you can do French polish as well as Earl Scruggs.
Maybe Larry might disagree.
I lost you there.
No, but seriously, when you get to, you have to be good at it. When you get to be
Polish as good as Earl plays banjo, then you can make money.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I was thinking I could probably play banjo about as well as Earl can French polish. How does that work? Okay, I'm going to start, I guess. This is kind of the hopeful department because it's basically a pretty scarred up instrument, and you can see the scars still. I probably should have or could have, or maybe I will, work with a much cleaner surface to give an idea of the rub out procedure, because it looks pretty good now. And if you look at it closely, in fact, I'd invite you to do that. There's I guess there's a palm print or a thumb print and some other stuff that's in the surface, of really very light, and then look at it very closely in reflected light. Just take it and pass it around if you want. And you can see the little tiny streaks that are left from my French polish rag and my pad. And they're sort of all over it. They're very light, and they're not really that unattractive. I could have finished up with my rag and my French polish streaks going with the grain, and I could have said, that's a finish. And in many cases, that's what looks right, the very light little streaking that goes with the grain. On some instruments, and Larry and I were just talking about the old Gibson mandolins, particularly with a sunburst finish, that doesn't look right. It looks best when it's absolutely glass smooth, just like a lacquer job. A funny thing about French polish, though, is that it doesn't look like lacquer even when it gets as shiny as it can get. I can't explain why that is. And I don't think that you can get that shine as effectively, the way I like it, by rubbing out as you can by the old-time technique of spiriting off. And what I'm going to do right now is try to demonstrate that a little bit. I don't know how successful it'll be. This is my disclaimer, so when it screws up. But I'm taking my same rag, it was just the cover over my little pad, and I've been just massaging it around with some alcohol, and I'm squeezing out this crusty kind of bit of shellac that's on there, and I'm just going to wash the rag very lightly. So I've got it almost clean now. That's a smelly shellac, alcohol in it. Dry it off a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing to my little pad from the inside. It's still got quite a lot of that shellac, and the shellac's fairly thick. So if I give it a good rinsing with alcohol like this, I will give it a serious dilution, and the alcohol will cut the shellac that's on there to a fraction of what it was. Not sure what it is actually, but it's really quite thin. Grab Well, I'm afraid of the lint, and so I use the same rag over and over and over and over until I wear through it to keep the lint down. Lint from rags is a serious issue, and it seems as you use it, the fibers of the rag start to wear a bit too, and it produces a slicker film. So I just seem to get better results with my old worn-out rag than I do with a new, clean one.
Are old diapers good to use for this, or?
I don't know. I think they're kind of thick.
Oh.
This is just a bed sheet. It's very thin.
Oh, okay.
My old friend Bob that taught me how to do some of this stuff said that he would use a silk scarf for this particular procedure, or he would take like a pair of nylon pantyhose and clip off a piece and use that as a skin over the top so that he wouldn't even get the trail of the fabric on the surface. Now I've got my rag here is, that's about as little wetter than when I had everybody feel it a while back. Makes a nice wet imprint, see, like that.
That's just alcohol.
Straight alcohol, and a little bit of shellac. There's only a little residual oil left on the surface. There's nothing at all on the pad in the way of oil at this point. And I'm just going to wipe over the surface. You can see the streaks that I'm making. I don't know if you can see in reflected light. But I'm just making the same kind of streaks that I made with my pad in the first place. The shellac that was on here was dry to the touch. It wasn't taking fingerprints anymore, but it was far from hard because it had been a short time since I did it. Ordinarily, I would have sanded this with about 600 grit and put on a thin layer and let it dry to the point where it was just a few minutes ago. So I think it's about the same then. So now I have just softened the surface with the alcohol, and I'm going to add a drop of oil, 2 drops of oil it looks like, and smear them around. And I'm going to get as thin a film on there as I can with my hand, and I'm going to wipe off. I'm using my hand because I don't want things to grab in the finish. I'm going to continue softening the finish with this alcohol rag, trying not to take finish off. Now you can see I've got some nice trails going here with the alcohol and the rag and the oil. And I'm going kind of cross diagonally, do a little circular stuff. I want to kind of cut over my little trails as I go. Can everybody see that okay? Mm-hmm. See those little smears that I'm making? Working fast, very light pressure. What I'm trying to do, and I hope I'm doing, is I'm trying to cut the high little ridges off of the tiniest little streaks that I left behind. I'm going to take my rag now. I've got it softened, I've got some oil on there, and I'm going to hose it down with some more alcohol. Just really kind of squeeze as much of that old shellac out of my pad as I can. So I'm really washing it down now.
I like that cap technique.
Oh, thank you. I learned that a long time ago. Every so often it leads me, though, to having it a little too loose, turning upside down, the cap falls off, and oh boy. Okay, I'm going to dry it again a little bit. Dry it a little bit more. Dry my hands. One of the things that happens is your hands get oil and shellac and everything on them. I'm going to put that in there for a second. I'm going to wash up real briefly. Just get the old shellac that's on my hands off. One of the things that happens also is that with shellac on your hands, you grab the instrument and you find yourself stuck to it. And that's really embarrassing when you're really close to the finished job and you just put your hands on the neck that you just finished and get it all wet. Okay. I'm going to try to do what I was taught was a hand rub finish. Okay, nice and dry. My pad is that wet, so still pretty wet. I've got a little oil on the surface, just enough that I can barely feel it. I can't even make much of a trail in it. I'm wiping very, very gently with my rag, barely touching it. I mean, you can't hear me hit the surface. I'm just touching it. And I'm satisfied that I've got almost enough oil on there. Not quite. Just a tiniest little wipe of oil. You know, a quarter of a drop or something. Wipe off the excess of my arm. And still just barely touching it. I mean, it's so tight, so light, I can barely even feel my rag touch down. And wiping back to see if my oil is looking good. Okay, now I'm going to say that things are going rather well now, I think. And my rag is getting drier as I go because there's only alcohol, nothing else on it. Very, very light touches. Back and forth across the grain. My little vapor trail behind my rag flashes almost instantly as I go. And I get just the tiniest little smears. I'm just going to keep going and going until my rag gets drier and drier and drier. And it's starting to get quite dry now. Quickie demo hardly makes a spot at all. Starting to increase the pressure just a little bit. And you can hear it as I go. You can actually hear me now.
You're increasing the pressure as it dries.
As it dries, I'm increasing the pressure. I'm increasing the speed. And I'm hitting it pretty hard now. This is exactly like spit shining a shoe. Now, I can still see some streaks left, but I'm going to let it go at that. I've got almost nothing left on the rag. It feels completely dry now. Dump it aside and hitting it with my hand now. Really generating some heat. So I'm polishing the surface without using any abrasive really, but I'm sort of melting it together just a little bit. And it gives it a very high shine. You feel how hot it is right there. See, it's pretty hot. Now you can see that there's no oil left on the surface. It's still a little streakier than I would like. In some areas it looks very good. And it has a funny property. You see it's quite shiny though. It's about as shiny as a rubbed out finish. And it has an odd property that as it dries it gets a little shinier. So as a rule, that's what I think about French polish, is that after it sits and gets harder, it seems to develop a little bit more of a shine rather than have the shine drop off the way you might think. Rubbed finishes seem to drop back a little bit. Right after they come off the buffer or something, it seems like they drop back. This seems to work just the opposite. So that's the simple technique then of taking the last coat, softening it very gently with maybe a tiny little touch of shellac and a little bit of oil, and then after that wiping it increasingly hard with only water. I'll get this right eventually. Only alcohol. We've only got alcohol on here and just a drop of oil to kind of smear across the surface just to keep it from sticking at first. And the pad at this point is virtually dry. There's an interesting thing that I haven't really figured a way to demonstrate that I'd like to. What I'd like to do is make a lot of mistakes in front of people without looking like an idiot. Because it's the mistakes, I think, that teach us what went wrong and how to keep on track. One of the things that happens if you don't really mop the surface with lots of wet shellac to start with, you can put a coat on that doesn't adhere very well. because shellac is mildly soluble in alcohol. And that means that the first layer isn't necessarily melted by the successive layers. If it's really dry underneath, the last layer may not be melted by that first wipe. And if you were to put a little shellac and oil on in the mixture to begin with, right over old shellac, it might not cut in well enough. So I used to have quite a trouble with little white streaks or cloudy patches that would turn up, indicating a poor adhesion between the two layers. And that would happen not right away, but it would turn up a week later under the finish. And it would look like exceedingly fine sanding scratches going maybe diagonally in some areas where it didn't really bite in. And so I'm going to say that the way to avoid that is to mop it on the first time. So I'm really quite sure it's biting in. What mopping it on consists of, I think, has to do with the condition of the finished surface. That thing was nothing but pit holes, craters, scratches, and that sort of thing. So I really wanted to go in and down and around and flood. If it were a smooth surface that was unbroken, mopping it on would consist of taking the rag before using any oil and giving a good coating wet, maybe 2 directions, and that would be all. If it's a really ancient marten top that's got tracks of grime and dirt ground into it, and you're going to just try to coat everything, I'll use my biggest, fuzziest camel hair brush, and I just go blop, 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 and just flood it. Maybe 3, 4, 5 coats. One this direction, one this direction, so the brush marks don't overlap, and dry between the coats, so that what I have is a sticky mass that takes several days to dry, and then I'll come back to it, sand it so that I grind off the high ridges left from the brush marks, and then go with the standard French polish technique on top of that. I think with finish work in general and with French polish in particular, being crude at certain times is really important to take a bold stroke as opposed to being so delicate that you don't get it to do the chemical job that it needs to do. So that concludes the French polish as I know it.